So, Professor, let's start with the downing of a Syrian Air Force jet by the U.S. Air Force. I mean, give me a sense of how this took place and how serious it is relative to stability in that region.
I think it's pretty serious. It's the first time the U.S. has shot down an enemy aircraft in many years. The U.S. has got about 1,000 special operations forces embedded in eastern Syria with mainly Kurdish fighters and some Arab auxiliaries who are making a concerted push on ISIL in its capital in Syria of Raqqa. And the Arab forces are remnants of the old Free Syrian Army that rose up against the Bashar al-Assad regime. They have been fighting ISIL, and they took a town called Tabqa, where there's a major dam away from ISIL. And the Syrian regime doesn't really distinguish between ISIL and the Free Syrian Army. They see them all as terrorists. So they were very unhappy about not having control of Tabqa, and they sent that plane to bomb the Free Syrian Army in Tabqa, 30 miles west or so of Raqqa. And the U.S. sees these forces as allies in rolling up ISIL, so they were annoyed that they were being attacked by the Syrian government. And, you know, there's been a diplomatic process with Russia where they've established deconfliction zones. So the U.S. maintains that Tabqa was in one of those and shouldn't have been attacked. So it shot down this plane that was targeting its allies.
And does where on the spectrum does the Free Syrian Army register with the Russians?
Well, the Russians have a complicated relationship with the Free Syrian Army. On the one hand, they see some of its factions as terrorists or as al-Qaeda. And on the other hand, they keep saying that they're perfectly willing to reach out to the moderates amongst them and to try to broker an agreement between them and the central Syrian government. So Russia is all over the place on this issue. I don't think that the group that's in Tabqa, which was targeted by Damascus, is one that the Russians seem very worried about. So I think this was coming from Bashar al-Assad and not from Moscow.
And okay, so following that that attack, I mean, where does that leave us at this point? And then I want to circle back and get a sort of a broader perspective on the status of the Syrian civil war and frankly also what's going on in Iraq, how it implicates ISIL. But where are we now? I mean, are we clear of what could have been potentially a very brief era where expansion could have or I should say expansion of the number of people that we are in conflict with there increased? In other words, are we clear of any potential of getting involved in some type of war with Russia there, let's say?
Oh, no. And shooting down the Syrian plane took us one step closer to conflict with Russia. The Russians responded by announcing that they would now track U.S. Aircraft that strayed over the Euphrates River into West Syria, which the Russians consider their sphere of influence. I'm alarmed by this rhetoric, and because one of the ways that you could track U.S. planes in West Syria would be to lock on radar from anti-aircraft batteries. But the U.S. Air Force would certainly consider that an aggressive action and possibly even an act of war, and so would be tempted to take out the anti-aircraft batteries. So if you get Russian personnel manning those batteries or advising Syrians on the use of them being killed because they were locking on to U.S. aircraft. That's really dangerous. And I don't think people are taking this seriously enough.
And in what instance would American jets, American Air Force, enter into Western Syria? I mean, is this something that has happened routinely? Is it something that can happen easily by mistake? Is this something where Air Force and the commanders would be particularly careful of avoiding? I mean, do we have a sense of what the likelihood of some situation like that happening is?
The likelihood is high. The U.S. flies over West Syria all the time. It conducts operations in West Syria in support of the Free Syrian Army. It has reached an agreement with Russia. You know, when these airplanes fly in an area where there are rival air forces, the way to avoid conflict is you send out a code called Identify Friend or Foe, IFF code. So the U.S. is alerting the Russians, you know, that this is a U.S. jet. The Russians have the IFF code. But these planes fly really fast, and Syria is a small country. So even just ordinarily operating the plane, you can't limit yourself to a compact little territory like east of the Euphrates. It just doesn't work that way.
Tell us what's involved in the downing. The U.S. has downed now an Iranian drone. I don't believe it's the first time, but because of its, I guess, proximity in time to the Syrian downing, is there any greater implications to that?
Well, it's a different theater of the war in a way. The U.S. has established a garrison north of Jordan at a little place nobody's ever heard of called Tenf. And it's training Free Syrian Army units at that Tenf garrison to go north and take on ISIL in the Syrian province of Deir ez-Zor. But a lot of people think that one of the reasons for the U.S. garrison at Tenf is that that's a kind of triangle where the Iraqi, Jordanian, and Syrian borders meet. And there's a road leading out from Baghdad to Jordan that forks into southern Syria and thence to Damascus. That the Iranians and their Shiite militia allies in Iraq are eager to get control of so that they can ship arms and personnel overland from Iraq to Damascus and Beirut easily. The U.S. wants to forestall that development as ISIL is rolled up and the war in Syria ends. It wants to establish kind of a U.S. zone of control all along the Syrian-Iraqi border and block Iran and its allies from Damascus. So the Iranians obviously are upset about this plan, and so they've been sending armed Shahed 129 drones. These are big drones. They need a runway to take off, and they have arms under their wings. They have missiles. Wow. So they've been sending these drones to harass the U.S. troops who are embedded at Tanf. And they actually did fire on Free Syrian Army units a couple weeks ago. And yes, the U.S. has been shooting them down wherever it finds them.
All right. Well, we have got to take a break. When we come back, I'd like to hear what the Russian agenda is in Syria, and also what is the status of ISIL, both in regards to its what's happening in Syria, but also what's happening in Iraq. We got to take a quick break. I'm Sam Seder. This is Ring of Fire Radio.